Hello, Tribesters and our extended tribe. Welcome to Conscious Leaders, our series with leaders and their advisors about the world of work and how it's changing. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Lucy Harris. Lucy has been a headhunter for over 25 years and is the founding partner of Altrua, an agency built on a passion for working around organizational health and purpose. More conscious leader than most, Lucy has been at the cutting edge of C-suite engagement, and few can be better off giving us a little bit of navigation around what's happening with leadership today and how it's evolved. For Lucy and Altrua, understanding purpose is key to delivering visions and results, always people, not profit driven. Lucy, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Let's start off just about your early career and how you got to where you are now. So can you give us a little bit of insight on your journey?
Yes, of course. I didn't plan on being a headhunter. I'm not sure many do. I have a creative degree and I grew up internationally with my father being in the British forces. So we lived all around the world. My passion was to work in the fashion industry, unquestionably. And I actually trained as a buyer and started life working for Harrods. So I did train and got to the level of buyer before being interested actually by more than one business as opposed to operating just within one company. And it was at that point that I engaged with a headhunter. And they offered me a slot to cross the table and sit on the other side of what was then a very large television screen shaped computer with a pile of physical CVs. And I thought that would be a great place to sit and have a watchful brief while I found myself another buying role. And the truth is I found myself fascinated by the movement of talent, industries, multiple businesses, and stayed. And far too many years later, I'm here.
What an interesting start. And it's so interesting how those, like, that one moment can change everything from based on where you thought you'd go, and then all of a sudden it evolves into something else. How has recruitment and headhunting changed over your extensive career?
Well, actually, the two are separate, but my early years in the industry saw me grow up in recruiting. So recruiting is more of a mass market, tends to be more mid-management level. And I have taken a different route to some search partners in that I've grown up with my candidate base. So there are plenty of examples of me having hired leaders 2 or 3 times at least through their career. So I've grown up with them, which has been a nice approach. And there are deep-rooted relationships on both sides of the table there. Search is a technical, difficult process that used to be a case of fishing in a pool, and hopefully you hooked the right fish. In layman's terms, it is now highly analytical, data-driven, protected by ruling around GDPR, enabled by fantastic social platforms and social media sharing a lot of information on talent. So it doesn't make it any easier, however, to have those meaningful relationships. You have to earn the relationship of a candidate in order to have a conversation with them about a great brief. And the same is true the other way around. You earn the relationship and operate as an ambassador for your client in order to hire the right talent and attract the right individuals to a conversation. So it is much more complicated than it ever was.
Interesting. And how, in your view, how has leadership changed since you started out? Are you seeing big shifts in how, the leaders 20 years ago headed up a company versus how they manage and lead teams now?
It was far more functional. I think, 25 plus years ago, certainly in the retail and consumer industry, you had the functional experts, the operator, the buyer, the merchandiser, the creative director, the finance director, and they tended to grow up through what I call the sort of T-bar, which is up through one function, and then they plateaued to become a leader at a managing director, regardless of the function they'd come up through. And in 2008, 2009, during the big financial crash, there was a need for really every leader in a business to be a lot more accountable and operationally affect change coming out of that crisis moment. So you saw the loss of actually managing director titles, and you had far more emergence of chief operating officers who had potentially finance as well as operations, supply chain. So coming up and out of the T-bar, you ended up with almost pieces of cake, which is a sort of a V-shaped role with much more accountability across the business for delivering not just the strategy and the leadership. And I would say that's evolved even further in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And leaders right at the top of the tree have meandered through different functions in a business, so that they're cross-functional. By the time they get to chief executive level, they hopefully have operated and led in a majority of the functions which they're going to be the ultimate leader for. So it's a matrix. We are operating now in a matrix, and the work we do to help structure teams and talent below a chief executive involves each of those accountable C-suite players to be involved in a multiple of functional areas working together. So there are, the questions around who owns what are the wrong questions to ask. It's how do we achieve our goal through a joint effort.
Okay, so that's actually really interesting, and I want to pick into that a little bit. So in the past, you would have been searching for specific criteria on a role and what was needed, and now you specifically in your agency look at a different set of criteria. Can you just talk about that a little bit more in detail?
Yes. So as a search firm, we don't set the criteria. We are very clear on our critical path. So on what information needs to be extracted at what point and built into what form of brief. But the criteria for the hire equally shouldn't be given to us by a client. So there is a totally different engaging conversation that talks about the reason for the hire. And there's a systemic set of questions and qualification in understanding of what's the mission. Yeah, that's a bigger question. What's the mission? How are you going to achieve it? What KPIs will you use to measure? And therefore, what is it? What is the search objective? So that's different. And I think that where search can not have a positive outcome is where a prescription, if you like, is given from either the search firm to the client based on what they feel is right for the business, without the authority to do so, or whether the brief is taken from the client to the headhunter without any proper understanding, getting under the bonnet of a business. So we are renowned for getting under the bonnet of a business, understanding how the bits connect. I came from the industry. Search is a secondary career. So it is really important to understand what the strategy is, what the end goal is, and what the purpose is. So there are three questions perhaps to bring in at this point. Whenever we work with a leader, whenever we work with a business, we will ask three clear questions. And those are why you exist, why do you exist, what difference you make, and why is it the way you do things why does that resonate with both your audiences internally, your employees, and your audiences externally, your consumers, whatever the model. So why do you exist? What difference do you make? And why does the way you do it engage on both sides of the fence? And they're very clear, simple questions, but that to us depicts purpose.
And those businesses that you're working with, obviously they're coming to you because you're deeply rooted in purpose, and you want to be placing people that have their own purpose, but are also committed to their company's purpose. Mm-hmm. How did you come up with that idea? What was driving you to work towards a business recruiting people with purpose?
Yes, I'm smiling.
I know you were a bit ahead of your time, because now people talk about people over profit, purpose-driven companies, but you started your business a little bit before people were necessarily considering that.
Yes, I think many would say we jumped on some sailing zeitgeist and carried the wave. I think we probably did, actually, without any intention of doing so. Altrua is a a derivative of altruism, and that's, you know, I called the business Altrua for a reason. And altruism to me is doing the right things, from which of course positive results come. So, but that has always been my MO throughout my career, is to do the right things, and I've never missed a number in my career. So I think that is very important. One of our values is a word that sounds Greek, arete, but it's pronounced in a French way, and that literally translated means the value of doing things in the right way has more reward for us than any commercial currency, and that is really, really, really important to us. So Altrua was born really as a positive intention to disrupt what the metrics of search, through, I think, analogy probably isn't too strong a word, an allergy to transactional search. So from a candidate point of view, I think there are a lot of very senior candidates who are not supported in that sort of personal coach, advisor experience through a search and through a dramatic career change. And equally, the client isn't given advice, isn't guided, there's no devil's advocate in the process to properly enable both sides. And personally, as an employee of a transactional search firm, many transactional search firms, they should all remain unnamed. That wasn't a positive experience necessarily permanently. So Altrua is about content, creativity, relationships, and when we get to it, exceptionally good process. So it's not that's not to compromise the search in any way, but there are things to us that matter more than just good transactional process.
You also talk about Thrival. Can you put this into context with relation to Altrua?
Yes. So for me, alchemy is around the right talent being in the right role with the right behavior. And all those three metrics should align to allow an individual and a business to reach that sort of utopian point of thrival and maintain it. So our mission is strength and leadership for a world that thrives. And that is really, really important to us. And that starts from within. And the three parts of the alchemy, if you like, a great talent in a great role is somebody being appointed into a good job. The positive, clear, culturally positive behavior is what will enable performance. And we call that thrival, and it's caught on. A lot of people talk to us about our thrival plan, and it's actually we've developed that into a tool that helps us qualify a business, a brief, and actually we use it right at the end of the process to work with both the informal referencing, the formal referencing, an assessment tool, and then we work with the client and the candidate to form that into an elaborated onboarding plan. It's much more than onboarding a thrival plan.
I just want to talk about the pandemic a bit. Did you notice with some of the clients that you worked with and the leaders that you worked with that they were shifting the way that they approached their business and their teams?
Yes, entirely. Come back to a comment I made around the world is a matrix. And for our industry, the dramatic unthinkable happened, which was we switched off physical stores. We switched off the ability to engage any audiences through physical retail, which was unthinkable. So I think the first hours, days, weeks of that process was a panic, blind panic in the industry. And actually the reaction to which was we can't possibly hire now. All the lights are off, the revenue streams are shut. It doesn't make sense to spend money on a headhunter or a recruiting process. We probably need to be letting people go, not hiring. That was the initial pattern. Actually, we in very, very early on switched into a position of sharing information. So people would call us and just say, what do you see in the market? What do you hear? How are people reacting? So we've always held very strong relationships with both our clients and our candidates and industry connections. So it was a fascinating time where we stopped hiring temporarily, not in every case, but temporarily in some cases, to try and understand the right approach to the subject that was appropriate that was respectful, that helped businesses face into, frankly, the unknown. Within a month, I would say, and not more than that, there was a different wave that happened, which was also fascinating, which was the empowered time businesses and leaders felt they had to get to subjects they didn't previously through operational life got to. So we saw phenomenal scenarios where businesses had their physical estate shut, yet they would work on advanced scenario planning to bring AI into the supply chain. They just hadn't had the time to stop the clock and get onto that. So then took over an incredible wave of hiring, really digitally led. We're very digitally fluent, so that came in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But that was exciting. There was little else to be concerned with operationally. So those processes took place very fast, in a lot of detail to make sure you achieve the right outcome. There was one individual I think I spoke to absolutely every day for 6 weeks. I did joke saying she didn't think she'd be in lockdown with me, but she was. And she was appointed into a fantastic COO role at the end of it. But making big, clear decisions at such a time in the world was difficult. Everybody needed a lot of hand-holding.
And those people that you did put into roles during the pandemic, they were obviously starting without going into an office necessarily. Absolutely. How did they actually make their mark? What was their onboarding without having their team around them?
I think it's the same with the search process. The same answer comes to the search process as for the onboarding. You're only operating through two senses online, the sight and sound. You don't have the rest to help you build a picture, from watching somebody lift a teacup to say hello to the receptionist, to sense their reaction to something that takes place during the course of the meetings, or you can't see it. So it was all sorts of clever gimmicks that were tried, staged, different projects given during that process to try and help the conversation come alive on both sides of the screen. But it was difficult. And what I refer to in digital processes, and they still go on, start to finish digitally, are sound bites. You need to have many, many, many sound bites and draw a picture from those than just draw a conclusion from 1 hour Zoom or Teams call. That's nowhere near as powerful as an hour's face-to-face interview or meeting. But you can build up a pattern of sound bites that enable a business to bring somebody on board, to land them, to develop those relationships. In a slightly more light-hearted fashion, there was lots of entertainment coming from candidates being hired into businesses who then confessed that they were 6'4" tall, and that had never been explored in the interview process. You couldn't. So there were parts to the relationship that needed forming in person that came later on in their onboarding.
And now that businesses are heading back into an office, it's sort of post-pandemic. There's obviously a new way of working, but people are starting to see each other. It's a bit more hybrid. Are you seeing any big workplace challenges?
Yes, lots. I think every business I talk to has this challenge of how do we have the right balance. I mean, we're a team of 4 in our business. We're still achieving that balance here too. But we do know that the fluency of communication, that less deliberate exchange that happens when you're in a room with people is far, it enables productivity. It's really constructive. So businesses are struggling with what is the norm. Is that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Is that a good use of space, time, energy, team connectivity? There are still sensitivities to coming back into a workplace. But I think it's figuring out what the new norm is as a whole and what the independent needs of a business and a workforce are.
Yeah, and we've heard from lots of our clients that it's that struggle of now that no one's in one place, that actually makes it a little bit more challenging to communicate, whereas everyone was remote, so you could deal with virtual in a certain way. Now with half the people in the office and half the people working remotely, how do you not ignore on a Zoom call, for example, the people that aren't in the room when you have half the people in the room? So trying to find that balance.
I was listening to a podcast this morning on exactly that, and I think this virtual reality is going to hit us before we know it. I still think that feels very space age to a lot of us, but the technology will enable that soon. I think it's I've been in meetings where the on-screen audience are almost completely forgotten about because there's so much, in-person engagement. I've been the person on screen with an incredibly noisy fishbowl of activity to watch through a screen. That's pretty difficult too. I've also been in meeting rooms where the individual on the screen is on the screen, but you've got this incredible robot that moves around the entire audience to make sure that they're getting a 360 view of the meeting. So technology is a wonderful thing. It is a challenge, but it's here to stay. We have to navigate it, and I think there's respect is something to consider here. What are we trying to achieve from the outcome from the meeting? What are the rules of engagement for this group of people getting together physically, digitally, and how do we make sure that everybody has a good experience from it? And experience is something our industry talks about in a lot of detail. I think businesses are now having to think about that experience internally as much as they are externally.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And it also makes me think about inclusivity and making sure that everyone is feeling included, because psychological safety is a big topic that's out there, and people aren't necessarily feeling safe to voice their opinions. If we can make people feel included, then actually they'll feel safer to voice opinions. You'll have more creativity,
absolutely,
collaboration. Yeah.
And it's hearing all the voices too. It's making sure that it's hearing voices. That's where I'd stop there. It's making sure that you can engage. Whereas I think if you pass somebody at their desk or watch their behavior doing something, something may occur to you. You can't do that in a digital world. You have to work harder to find those moments.
Yeah, trying to read those cues. I know you're extremely busy right now, but it's actually at a time when some things are quite quiet in the market. Why are you so busy? Where are things moving with your clients?
There's a lot of leadership roles, number one leadership roles, so the chief executive hire. There's a huge amount of transformation. And I think that was coming anyway in 2019. And of course, the fueled change deliberately around channel play and digital being a real driver was something that the pandemic enabled. So businesses had to change and adopt, and the balance of channel mix coming out of the pandemic is just different. So the physical experience, or being in an office, or being in a shop, or being in a hospitality or a consumer space, is netted out in a different way, which means the engines driving that experience are different. They look different. They need to be resourced in a different way. So I think the change was coming to our industry anyway, but as that coined phrase, I think we went through 10 years worth of change in 10 months. So there is a lot of transformation. There's a new phrase I use that I think is very descriptive of the moment the industry is going through, which is this is a combination of oil meeting water. So there are new teams of talent going into businesses, mixing with existing teams of talent who have perhaps been in an organisation for much longer. And that's really interesting. So if you like, the vinaigrette that's created from the oil and water mixing is fascinating. It is taking some time to settle and settle together, as opposed to separate out and exist in a business. So there is, just as the phrase describes, there's a moment where the new is meeting the existing and perhaps more traditional inside a business, and it's positive, but it will take some time to shake out.
I want to switch to well-being and leadership. How much is well-being featuring in your leader conversations?
Well, I think in order to lead purposefully and to ensure that you're at that point in thrival, there are things each and every leader, and indeed business, needs to do for themselves to ensure that you stay in the best state that you possibly can be. And I know personally, I know what mine are, and I'm very aware that I need to do my 3 sessions of Pilates and 2 of yoga a week. That matters to me, and that time is sacrosanct. I will not compromise that. Otherwise, I can't be in the shape I need to be to advise on these critical hires and this transformation, nor have the energy and enthusiasm to learn, go through each process. So I think each and every leader needs to think about how they help be at their best, and whether that's a wellness program, whether that's peace of mind, whether that's time to think. There's been so much coming at us through the last 2 years. There's still an overwhelming overhang of fatigue. We talked before the session started that the world is missing in action right now because it's Easter time. This year is not a case of, are you going away for Easter? It's, where are you going away for Easter? Because the world is catching up on some well-needed rest and holiday time with their families, with their friends, to experience something other than work, life at home. So I think I'm really pleased to see the industries and the world respond to that. It's as quiet now this week as it was in last August. You know, that people are taking their foot off the gas just to recover. And then there will be hopefully a new wave of energy that takes us through the last part of the spring into the summer. Wellness and being at your personal best, whatever that takes, is critically important. And unfortunately, they're still throwing up very, very difficult challenges for us all to deal with. Those are affecting the industry in a big way. And I think if we look at retail, consumer, travel, hospitality and leisure, there are big headwinds that are causing businesses and leaders to worry, not too fine a point, but to worry about what comes later on in the year in terms of industry dynamic. So unless we are in the right shape to manage that, we will be fatigued and won't make the right decisions and calls at that moment in time. So critical to stay in shape, critical.
And I know when you say stay in shape, you're talking mentally in shape.
I'm talking mentally, I'm talking physically, I'm talking from a point of view of feed. What is it that you need, I need to feed ourselves with positive, energizing battery reserve, so that when our daily lives, whether that's being a parent or running a business or leading a transformation or leading incredibly exciting growth, you will need to draw upon an energy bank, and that needs to come from somewhere. A great phrase I work with my coach on is SHED, which is an acronym for sleep, hydration, exercise and diet, and that's something that I will practice my thought around SHED every weekend in order to restore, ready for the coming weeks. And you know, most leaders I work with have something that gives them that charge, that helps them thinking about being ready for whatever's coming. And I think the pandemic has taught us to be ready for what we didn't know was coming. So yeah, we're having to anticipate.
We are. Do you speak and coach your leaders on this, or your clients on this, or are they coming into it because they typically have a purpose-driven company that they're?
It always comes up. I'm not a personal trainer. I'm not a coach. We're not consultants. We're headhunters, and in fact, our strapline is unapologetically good headhunters. But it is part of it, and it always comes in. So. You know, the conversation around what do you do that keeps you alive and inspired and motivated and having the appetite and energy for your business or for your role, that comes into conversation all the time. And particularly if somebody's transition, if you've got a leader in the market who is actually looking at their next career chapter, I often advise they treat it as a school day and a school week. So they work between 9 and 3, they take an hour for lunch, they do sports on a Wednesday afternoon, and they balance life with looking for that next career chapter as a full-time job. So it's if you are in the market, there's a responsibility to be in good shape and energizing the audiences you engage with.
And I think it's also about learning those boundaries. And just as you said, you know that you have it's sacrosanct, your time for what you need to do to show up as your best, and making sure that we then educate those that, you know, are below us to learn their boundaries and be able to talk through their boundaries with their manager or their leader.
I had a great anecdote last week where I was taking a reference on a senior player, and their team report said this woman taught us modern leadership. She worked around the clock. She traveled on a Sunday, but she made no excuse to visit her son's football match on a Wednesday afternoon. So it's just different. It's making your choices and choosing your priorities in life that allow you to be and have those roles, whether it's professionally or personally.
And with leaders now, do you see them there taking time to consider what they're investing in well-being for their employees, or considering how they can support employee well-being more?
Absolutely. So I think the sort of the drive to achieve in the ESG space is really important. There's a requirement, in fact, not doing enough of it and not commenting and not having a responsible tone of voice in around clear subjects has led workforces to speak out against businesses, which has been culturally highly damaging. There are several examples of that. I think I've been asked many questions around what is the appropriate line of conduct when supporting causes, what workforces will be looking for, and what they expect of their employees as a standpoint. So yeah, this is really important, and I think matters more and more to up and coming generations in organisations. But there's a requirement. It's not just for the leader to feel it's a good investment of time and resources, but there is a requirement to make sure that your workforces are, I suppose, invested in. It's reward of a different nature.
And you're involved in the Princess Trust. Can you talk about your role there? And also how you fit it all in?
It's another day job. I've been supporting the trust for over 17 years now. And in my world, every young person deserves a chance, and that is exactly the strapline of the Princess Trust. So the trust is unusual. They have 6 commercial groups who work with different industry streams to act as their commercial personal trainer. That's the easiest way of describing it. And I now chair the retail and consumer leisure group in its, I think it's 12th year of in existence, which is great. And that role is really to help the trust operate as a commercial organisation, but to extend the message of the work they do as a calling for businesses to get on board and support. So it's fascinating work, and it's also really, really humbling work. There's some phenomenal stories of young people who have come from nothing with really very broken backgrounds, who have the drive, the determination to overcome enormous hurdles and develop their lives. They are just empowering stories. They really are. Our role is to make sure that organisations are inclusive and potentially offer employment opportunities to the less privileged backgrounds, to the uneducated backgrounds, so those who've been through these journeys, as much as they do consider their diversity and equality quotas.
Amazing. Such a good cause, Lucy.
Yeah,
so
very passionate about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to catch up with you and also hear all that's going on in your world. Pleasure. And how things are moving forward with leadership, that businesses are being more mindful about purpose and about the well-being of their employees. If people wanted to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
So you're welcome to visit the site. You're welcome to get in touch with us directly, info@altruapeople.com. We're on LinkedIn, we're on social media, but you're welcome to have a conversation with you. There are 4 of us here, and we'd welcome a call. Great.
Thank you for joining us, Lucy. And to all of you out there, be here and be well.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next episode. And by the way, if you like what you heard, then hit subscribe to receive all the future episodes. Better yet, if you're feeling inspired by what you just heard, then leave a review letting me know who else you might want to hear from on Conscious Leaders. To learn more about the show, about conscious working, or Tribe, our membership, head over to our website, consciousworking.co. Yes, it's just CO. So consciousworking.co. And for those of you that might be suffering burnout, we have a great free resource, the Beat Burnout Guide. It's a really simple assessment with tools for you to take action now. Check it out in the show notes so that you can access it immediately. See you in the next episode. Be here and be well.